Is Satan Lucifer? I don't know why I was thinking about that. I think I was reading in Job about how God and Satan were, it's like they're gambling over Job, you know. And then I remembered a post that I read somewhere about someone saying that Lucifer and Satan aren't the same individual. And I remember God talking about Lucifer in Isaiah 14. I think about it quite often. And I was wondering, you know, where did I get the idea that Lucifer and Satan are the same individual? I know it was from theology handed down to me. There's one passage in, I think it's in Ezekiel, that talks about the prince of Tyre, or Tyre, however you pronounce that. And he's talking to a man, and then obviously he's talking to this principality behind him. And then there's another duality too. Remember when Jesus was talking to Peter, he says, "Get behind me, Satan." Well, he's talking to Peter, and he's talking to Satan, which means adversary. You know, so there's Satan, which, let's look at the word Satan. Let's look at the word Satan and see what the definition is. Let's explore this together. So here we have, "And the Lord said unto Satan." Now, from whence comest thou? And Satan is an individual. You know, he's speaking to him. And remember, Peter's talking in Acts to Ananias and Sapphira. Why has Satan filled your heart? So we can see that Satan can possess people. But here, let's look at the Hebrew definition for Satan. And this is eSword, by the way. It's basically a free resource. It's donation. If you want to send them a donation, I suggest that you do. It's a great resource. But here we have Satan as the Hebrew 7854. And it says an opponent, especially with the article prefix Satan, which is the archenemy of good. And I think this is the Strong's definition. Adversary. So who is God talking to in Job chapter 2? It's a person that's answering him back. You know, another thing is, remember when Jesus was talking to the demoniac in the Gadarenes, he says, "What's your name?" He goes, "We are legion, for we are many." You know, there's many of them. So is Satan a particular entity? And when we look at Lucifer in Isaiah 14, it looks like he has a name. Okay, but he's also the Prince of Tyre. He's called the Prince of Darkness, many different names. And, you know, I started thinking about this. Is Lucifer Satan, or is Satan Lucifer? How should we even ask the question? Because Lucifer can be an adversary, right? But is Satan only Lucifer? You know what I'm saying? So Satan means adversary. I think we should probably take that into consideration as we're thinking about that. Is Lucifer Satan? Is Satan Lucifer? Which one's correct? So now I ran across the Dake Commentary, and I thought, man, this is a really, really, really good commentary. I accidentally came across it. And Finis Dake, you know, from the Dake Study Bible, man, it is a great study Bible, dude. It's like $100 or something. I couldn't really afford it. But on eSword, you can get it as a module. I forget what I paid for it. But I started reading them like, you know, I want to share what this guy says with my audience. So I put the Finis Dake commentary over here so we could look at it. And, you know, I think you're going to be surprised at what this guy says. And what's interesting, the reason I think that this is like God is because I wanted to just check out Isaiah 14:12, you know, and see if Lucifer is indeed Satan. And that's the question I had on my mind. And what are the odds of the commentary just tackling what I was thinking about? You know, I thought, wow, this is pretty crazy. So let's look at this, and I'm gonna scroll over some of the scriptures so you know what he's referring to. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer? The original fall of Lucifer is right here. Watch when I hover over, man. Isn't this cool? Okay? As well as his final casting down to hell. That's another thing. A lot of people think that hell is, Sheol, which it is. But there's this huge teaching going on right now, and I'm not going to address it in this, that there is no hell. There's just depart from me. It doesn't say depart from heaven, ye that work iniquity. But one of our goals is to sit with Jesus on his throne. To him that overcomes, I will grant with him, for him to sit with me in my throne. So, which is the end of all rebels against God, is the subject of this passage. Now, 6 proofs Satan is the subject. Now, I was looking at Job chapter 2. Satan means adversary, right? So here we have in the mind of Finis Dake that Satan is one person. And let's just explore his argument here, because it's very interesting. Lucifer is the name of Satan. That's how he starts this out. In other words, it's not the prince of Tyre. It's not Peter. Remember when Jesus said to Peter, "Get thou behind me, Satan." Well, wait a minute. Is Lucifer in Peter, or is he talking about adversary? So you see the problem there? Anyway. Okay, Lucifer is the name of Satan, which is agreed by Bible scholars. Now, one of the things interesting here is King James is the only one that translates this word as Lucifer. Okay? Lucifer, Hebrew, Hillel, right? It means brightness. It means morning star. If you look at the original Hebrew, 1966, in the sense of brightness, the morning star. And then, for some reason, Strong's goes ahead and throws in the word Lucifer here. But some of the other translations don't have the word Lucifer. Isn't that interesting? So, let's continue on here. It means to shine, right? Satan is the only one in Scripture referred to as having actually fallen from heaven. Now, this is going to be important. Right here, how art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning. And the pentagram, which is this 5-pointed star inside the circle, that's the witchcraft symbol, or Satan worshiping symbol of Lucifer coming to the earth, the 5-pointed star. And it's kind of referring to this. Now, Jesus refers to this in Luke chapter 10, and I think he refers to it somewhere else in the Gospels as well. But he says, and he said unto them, I beheld Satan as lightning fall from heaven. And the only personal ruler that is yet to be cast out of heaven with fallen angels. So this talks about there was war in heaven, Michael and the archangels, and the dragon was cast out, that old serpent, the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth. Now here we have the word he, which personifies an entity, right? The Bible refers to Satan as the dragon. The Bible itself says it's a he, right? And then the angels came with him. So that's pretty interesting. This identifies him as Lucifer of this passage. So, that's a pretty good argument. I'm going to say that is pretty awesome. Jesus sees him in the book of Revelation, he's cast out. Okay? Satan is the only person other than Christ and angels who is called the morning star. Now I'm going to tell you something interesting, guys. Satan and Jesus are called the morning star. Now, does that cook your noodle? I mean, think about that. It's like, wait a minute. I think I know the Bible, and then I'm going to have to deal with the fact that Satan, son of the morning, right, and then Jesus, morning star. I mean, that's right there. It's in your face, right? And so the angels are so called when the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy. So, whoever Lucifer is, he could not be a mere man, but a heavenly being. Right? We think of Antichrist. Well, he's probably possessed. And John says there's many Antichrists that have already gone out into the world. They're possessed by a something that opposes Christ. It's against Christ. It's the spirit of Antichrist. There's the spirit of Antichrist, and then there's the person of Satan, which is Finis Dake is making this argument. Lucifer actually ascended to heaven in an effort to exalt his throne above the stars of God and become like the Most High. This no earthly man could do, for he would have no access to heaven apart from God. Now, one of the things that I want to talk about here is we in the church, we have this desire. Like, I wanted to be a rock star when I was a kid, and I used to love to get on stage. And when you're doing the music, or I was also into acting, there's this energy that comes from the audience that just, wow, man, you just feel this ungodly power. It's like, wow, it's an amazing feeling. And I think it's interesting. There's an argument that Lucifer or Satan was, I think somewhere in the book of Zechariah, he was a worship leader in heaven. I don't know if I agree with that or whatever. But have you ever noticed how Satanists seem to get into music? Have you ever noticed that when we go to a church building, there's a stage and the musicians are raised up and they're facing the audience? It's not like the Mosaic tabernacle or the Davidic tabernacle where we were around the 12 tribes were around the throne, like in Revelation chapter 4, they're around the throne worshiping the Lord in his direction. But now you have the worship teams with worship leaders, standing above this audience in their applaud. I mean, he's completely infiltrated even the worship service. I mean, and I follow some of the popular worship teams on Instagram, and I watch their stories, and basically you might be surprised at how they never talk about Jesus. Anyway, that's kind of beside the point. But Lucifer actually ascended to heaven in an effort to exalt his throne above the stars of God and to become like the Most High. This no earthly man can do, for he would have no access to heaven apart from God. Right? For he said in his heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. So, I mean, this is an amazing commentary. It's the Finis Dake commentary on the thing that I was praying about. I mean, he happens to address it really well. Part 5 here, this whole passage has no literal meaning if interpreted in connection with a man, but in the light of other plain passages about the fall of Satan. Let's look at them. Okay, we already seen Ezekiel 14:12 through 15. Isaiah 14:12 through 15. Here's Ezekiel. Remember I was talking about the king of Tyre? He's talking about the king of Tyre. He talks about how he's been in the Eden of the garden of God. Every precious stone was his covering, right? He was the anointed cherub that covereth. And notice, it's personifying an entity. It's not a spirit, Thou was perfect in all thy ways when thou was created, but till iniquity was found in him. Okay? The heart was lifted up. You don't see this part on the screen. Let me see if I can, I'm going to leave it right there. Matthew 25:41. This is an interesting passage. He said, depart from me, you cursed, into everlasting fire. You think there's no everlasting fire? Okay. Prepared for the devil and his angels. This is another personification of an entity, right? So, yeah. But is Lucifer Satan? Is Satan Lucifer? I think Finis Dake is making a pretty good case here. Luke 10:18. I beheld Satan. We've already read this. Ephesians 6 and Revelation. We've already read these. Let's go to number 6 here. This is another example of how the law of double reference, two persons are one natural and the other supernatural, being involved in the same passage, as when Christ said to Peter, get thee behind me, Satan, right? Get thee behind me. He also says, I will put enmity between thee and the woman. Now, he's talking to the serpent in the garden here. So here God, here the Bible, or Finis Dake, is saying that there was an entity within that serpent. And God is talking to the serpent, but he's also talking to the principality behind it. He's saying basically principalities work through personalities. Isn't this awesome? I mean, this is a really good study. I'm excited about it. In this chapter, we have the earthly king of Babylon addressed, right? In Isaiah 14, he's talking about the king of Babylon. Like in Ezekiel, he's talking about the prince of Tyre, right? So he's talking to the king of Babylon during this whole Isaiah 14 thing. Like, he's talking to the person, like, Peter, get thee behind me, Satan. Talking to prince of Tyre in Ezekiel. Here he is talking to the king of Babylon. Yeah, and then he goes on, they're going to look beyond is this the man that made the earth to tremble, that did shake the kingdoms? Okay, so this is a person that can die, and they bury his body, right? That made the world as a wilderness and destroyed the cities thereof, that opened not the house of prisoners. All the kings of the nations, even all of them, lie in glory, everyone in his own house. So in this, the invisible king of Babylon also referred to, that's the law of double reference. Now here's 9 facts about Lucifer that Finis Dake is asserting here. And it's interesting. I'm going to tell you this is an interesting thing to ponder. He was cast out of heaven. We've already seen that. If he fell from heaven, he must have been cast out. And if cast out, he must have ascended to heaven in the first place to be cast out. There was some reason for him going there and not staying there after he got there. It must have been a forced or physical casting out, a departure because of superior power and forces. Now, he was cut down. You know, I want to say something about the word cast out. When the New Jerusalem comes out from heaven, you know, a lot of us think in a 3-dimensional terms that, you know, heaven's a physical place in this dimensional reality. Okay? Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is within you. You know, we wrestle not with flesh and blood, but with principalities, spiritual wickedness in high places. You know, there's a heavenly war going on right now. When Elisha said to his servant, Lord, open his eyes, and then he saw all the angels around. Okay? You must be born again to see this heavenly realm. I'm not gonna say I disagree with Finis Dake, but I am going to say that, you know, I think heaven could be considered also a different dimension, right? Because when the beggar and the rich guy, you know, one went to Abraham's bosom, but there was this chasm that they could not pass. You know, they could talk to each other, but they couldn't pass through from one to the other. And then we see the angels in Jude. They left their first estate, and they in Genesis chapter 6, they saw that the daughters of men were fair, and they had children with them, and that's why God destroyed the earth. So, you know, basically they left their light beings, and they came. I mean, this is just something to ponder on, but I want you to consider that the heavenly dimension is probably a dimension. You know, I mean, a lot of us think of three dimensions. It might be something else. He was cut down to fell a tree, destroy anything, cut down, cut off, cut asunder to the ground. This was the reason he did not remain in heaven. So Dake is convinced it's one person entity, and I think he's making a really strong argument for it. He was forcibly intercepted in his invasion of heaven and was defeated and cast down as a tree being felled by a woodsman. Okay. He was cut down to the ground. He found himself back on earth, and he ascended from and which he ruled before his fall and invasion of heaven. He had already weakened the nations. Okay, Isaiah 14:12. He had already weakened the nations, and then here he refers to Prince of Tyre a lot as the anointed cherub that covers. This means that before his invasion of heaven, he had weakened the nations of earth over whom he ruled since the creation of the earth and its inhabitants. It was a period before Adam's time. Now this is where it gets kind of like, whoa, put on your seatbelt. He's about to go into a teaching that talks about there was a gap of time between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2. He's going to make an argument here for what's called the Pre-Adamic Race. I'm just going to explore this with you. It's something to think about. But here we go. The guy makes a good argument, okay? 7 proofs that Lucifer ruled people. Now, people is important, right? They're called nations here. Nations is the Greek word for nations is ethnos, which means it's where we get the word ethnicity. Nations is not a governmental, I mean, it can be, but nations is most, it's like races and colors and tongues. You know, it's not necessarily a geographical boundary as we think of it. They're called nations here, okay? Okay, translated Gentiles, nations, people, heathen hundreds of times, and never translated angels. The nations he ruled over and weakened them. So he's saying here that they ruled over the nations. It's never referred to as angels. I'm going to tell you what, that is a good argument. That is a good argument. God told Adam to replenish the earth. Now, there's a lot, when you read the Bible, God does tell him to replenish the earth, not plenish it. Just as he tells Noah here, he's going to tell Noah to do the same thing. Look, and bless him, said to them, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. Okay? Notice that God tells male and female created he them. You know, he created them male and female. He says them plural. So I'm going to say, hey, you know, the human mind, wow, can we even keep up with what God's saying in his Bible here? It takes the Spirit to do it. He told Noah to do the same thing 1,600 years later. Notice how he says, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. Not plenish, but replenish, which means it had to have been destroyed. That's his argument. According to this, it's as reasonable to believe that the earth was plenished before Adam's time as it is to accept that it was plenished before Noah's. So that's that whole thing between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2. Furthermore, the command to replenish it meant to do so with their own kind, men. This indicates the kind of inhabitants which the earth... I mean, this is a great Bible study. This indicates the kind of inhabitants which the earth had in the first place. Adam and his race can only reproduce their own kind. Isn't that cool? All right. Now, here's where I've heard this argument before, and I can't really stand on it, but you know, it's one to scratch your head and think about. Jeremiah confirms the fact that men, not angels, inhabited the earth before Adam. Now he's saying Jeremiah, the lamenting prophet that prophesied the Babylonian captivity and lived through it, okay, that prophet, Jeremiah, for in his description of the chaotic earth, he says, there was no man. In the time before Adam and chaos, men lived in cities and fruitful places on earth like men of today. So they must have eaten food and been mortal as we are today. So here we see that Finis Dake is making the case that Satan was destroying nations before Adam and Eve. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard of this Pre-Adamic Race thing, but this is kind of where they get it. Jeremiah 4:23-26. And I beheld the earth, and lo, it was without form. Okay, so that tells you, hey, we're talking before it was formed, and void in the heavens, and they had no light. This is before light was created, I guess. I beheld the mountains, and lo, they trembled, and all the hills moved lightly. I beheld, and lo, there was no man, and all the birds of the heaven were fled. I beheld, and lo, the fruitful place was after the wilderness, and all the cities thereof were broken down at the presence of the Lord and by his fierce anger. You know, guys, I don't know. But let's just keep going because this is interesting. And if you're interested in pursuing this, this is a module in eSword. It's a lot cheaper than getting the Dake Bible. A lot cheaper. And plus you can take notes and you can hover, you know, over. It's awesome. So Ezekiel also confirms the fact that they were people, as in point 1 above, and were ruled by kings. Both terms are used in Ezekiel 28:11. That's that prince of Tyre. Peter indicates, now he's even going to Peter, guys, that the Pre-Adamites were mortal beings, for they could be drowned. Okay. The world Greek cosmos, you know, social order that was before Adam's day, being overflowed with water, perished, but the heavens and the earth, which are now, since 6 days' work of Genesis 1:3, you know, right there, are kept in store, reserved unto the fire against the day of judgment. For now we look for a new heavens and a new earth. Right here. See, that's the 2 Peter 3:5-13. So I don't know if I'm on board with that part, but it seems like, to make his point that Lucifer is Satan, that he's relying really heavily on this pre-Adamic race. Okay? Moses confirms this further by revealing the fact of the flood which caused the pre-Adamites to be drowned. And the earth was without form and void, darkness on the face of the earth, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. No statement regarding angels or spirit beings of any kind living on earth can be found in Scripture. Angels of Satan are spoken of as stars of heaven, indicating that they were originally created to be God's subjects in heaven and not Lucifer's on the earth. Now, I think we're going to get through this pre-Adamic thing. I didn't want to camp out there too long. But the only statement that in Scripture that causes some to stumble over the idea of pre-Adamites being men is 1 Corinthians 15:45. The first Adam was made a living soul, the last Adam was made a quickening spirit, where it speaks of the first man, Adam, but this could be only understood by realizing that he was created first of this present race of men. It should never be taken to mean that he was the first being who ever lived on the earth. Okay, well, I like exploring this, but I think we're getting on a house of cards. This is just the way I feel about it. Even nations made up of men, mortal beings capable of being drowned in a flood, operate in a social system before Adam in the flood of Lucifer's time. I will ascend into heaven. This is one of the things Lucifer said in his heart when planning to overthrow God of heaven, according to Colossians 1:15-18. Thrones, dominions, principalities, and powers, visible and invisible. So the invisible part leads me back to, the kingdom of heaven being invisible, a thing that we cannot see. He gets into some really good arguments here. Were created in heaven and in earth, which shows the establishment of kingdoms in many places in the heavens and other planets besides the earth. Lucifer was given in other planets. In other planets. By faith, we know he created the worlds. I'm like, oh, wow, okay. Lucifer was given dominion of the earth and worked deceitfully to get other angelic rulers to follow him in his war against God. Not only did Lucifer's own earthly mortal subjects rebel, but over 1/3 of God's angels, for there are many still with Satan to be finally cast on the earth in future tribulation. So right here, he's saying the great tribulation, the woman travailing. Wow, that's a whole study in itself right there. He is putting the Great Tribulation in the future. The place of the mobilization was the earth. How long they rebelled before the actual break with God is not known. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. This statement not only proves that Lucifer's plan was to invade heaven, dethrone God, and become the supreme ruler of all creations, but it shows that he already was a ruler. If he had a throne, I will exalt my throne. See, this is a good point. He really does make good points. If he had a throne, he had a kingdom, and he himself was a king. He had subjects to rule over, and there must have been a location for the kingdom. Who were his subjects? The pre-Adamic men of point 3. I will exalt my throne. Well, 1/3 of the angels fell down with him, so wouldn't he rule over angels? So that's kind of like, wait a minute. Because we know his angels, it was his angels, Satan and his angels. So I might say, I need to back up here and back up a little bit. The pre-Adamite men of point 3 above, and his kingdom was located on the earth, as seen as point 7 below. Because Jesus says it was Satan and his angels. They're his angels. A third of the angels followed him down, right? I will also sit upon the mount of the congregation on the sides of the north. Lucifer was not satisfied to sit on his own throne, but wanted to sit also on God's throne, to be worshipped as the supreme sovereign of all creations, all the creations. This gives the location of direction of heaven, north of the earth. He hangs the earth upon nothing and stretches the north over an empty space. That's in Job, something like that. So, man, that's another indication of where heaven is. This gives the location and direction of heaven north of the earth, and it reveals the fact that there's a congregation of saints or holy beings who gather to worship God. It speaks of promotion coming, not from the east, west, or the south, but from the Lord. So according to this also, the Lord and heaven are in the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. And this is compelling too. He says this in Isaiah 14:14. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. This settles the matter regarding the location of Lucifer's kingdom before Adam's time. Now, I'm going to take little issue with this. There was no rain clouds. There was no bow in heaven until the great flood. If you remember, Adam was walking in the midst of the day. There was no floods. So there was no rain at that point. So I kind of think in order to have a cloud, you got to have some rain. So I'm going to take a little issue with this whole pre-Adamic thing. You know, I'm not necessarily jumping on that hook, line, and sinker, but it is fun to think about. 3 things located. It had to be under the planet heaven. So the planet heaven sounds like he's thinking in the 3-dimensional thought. Or Lucifer could not have determined in his heart to ascend to heaven. Okay? Ascending means outward from the center of gravity. You got to go up, right? That's why the bottomless pit, when you're in the bottom, people think it's in the center of the earth because every which way is up. You can't go down any further, right? It had to be under the stars of God, or he could not have determined to exalt his throne above them. It had to be under the clouds that surrounded the earth, or he could not have determined to ascend above them. Though a kingdom could be located many places under heaven and under the stars, it could not be under the clouds of the earth without being on earth. This should convince us that Lucifer had an earthly kingdom, not a heavenly one, and that his subjects were earthly, not heavenly. He's still on the Satan ruling over man thing, pre-Adamic. Furthermore, since angels and other spirit beings are not constituted like the beings created to live on the earth, we must conclude that they were not the earthly subject of Lucifer's kingdom. The fact that angels of Satan are now confined to the heavenlies surrounding the earth is proof that they no longer are fit to reside in heaven. And the fact that they will be confined eternally in hell beneath the earth. Okay, he's making that case. And shall he say also to them, the left hand, depart from me, you cursed, into everlasting fire prepared for the devil and his angels. See, here it is in that scripture, the devil and his angels. That sounds like to me he was ruling over angels, right? Proves that they sinned in connection with the earth of Lucifer's program of invading heaven from the earth. So, I don't necessarily agree with everything here, but I am saying, something to scratch your head about. We're going to finish it. I will be like the Most High. This was the central idea around which revolved all sinful and rebellious activities of Lucifer. It's a noble trait to desire to be like God, but to transgress the laws of God and become devoted to a life of self-gratification at the expenses of the highest good of all. This is the greatest of all crimes among free moral agents. Lucifer wanted to become like God at the expense of God and everyone else. This was extreme sinfulness against God and nature. It was by this appeal to be like God that Eve was deceived, right? She wanted to be like God. Remember how Satan says, for God doth know that in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and you shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. Christ came to imitate God among men, and to set an example of true God-likeness, that of being like God in consecration to the God of all, not for the good of self-gratification. Thus he repeatedly declared the true nature of consecration of godliness. See Christ's union with the Father. Thou shalt be brought down to hell. Now notice that down, bottomless pit, down means gravity, right? This was the final doom of Satan, down to hell. Revelation 20:10. Was cast in the lake of fire and brimstone. That's the fire that comes up out of the earth, which it weakens the nations. And this is the last part. Lucifer had already weakened the nations over whom he ruled before his actual invasion of heaven. His method was slander and turning them away from God in his heart. After that, it was easy to lead them into an open rebellion. Okay, so then he goes on to quote the Prince of Tyre. So we went all over the map there, but one thing I wanted to address in the beginning of this video was I was thinking, is Lucifer Satan? Is Satan Lucifer? Is Satan an entity, or does it mean simply adversary? Okay, and then Dake, he went down a few rabbit trails with the Pre-Adamic race, but he clearly believes that the name of Satan is Lucifer, and that Satan is an individual, right? Not just adversary. Anyway, I just wanted to post this and see what you think. God bless you. Thank you for being in my life. If this has touched you, please share this video with your friends and family. Get their input. Amen. Till we meet again, dig deeper and go higher.